Dr. Ben Spencer.
I beg to move that the Planning Enforcement Bill be read a second time. Mr. Deputy Speaker, rogue development is the cause of great anger and misery in Runnymede and Weybridge. Our green belt and natural environment is incredibly important. Our green belt prevents urban sprawl. It protects biodiversity. It provides a home for countless types of wildlife and provides essential outdoor space for leisure. Whether it's green parks, farmers' fields, meadows and forests, our green belt is our community identity, health and well-being, and it must be protected. I've seen the incredible harm rogue development does in my beautiful constituency of Runnymede and Weybridge, but speaking to other members, it happens everywhere. I am here today to right this wrong, to put strong measures in law to stop rogue development in its tracks and to protect our green belt and local communities. We have planning policy and rules to regulate where development can happen. We have processes of appeal and enforcement, and for the most time, people stick to those rules. But some people do not stick to the rules. They deliberately build on Greenbelt, all without permission. They set up lorry parks with HGVs trundling down country lanes in front of people's homes and schools, all without permission, and it is shameful. They build temporary homes with no thought to infrastructure, sewage, water or impact on local services, all without permission. They destroy green fields and forests to make a quick buck. Now this in itself is enough to infuriate anyone, particularly my residents who live next to a rogue development. But there is something even worse, even more toxic and offensive than the rogue development itself. One of the things that unites us all, I believe, is the British sense of fairness and fair play. Yeah. As MP for Magna Carta, the importance of due process, proper legal structures and rights of appeal, these weigh heavily on me and are always at the forefront of my mind. Sometimes people make innocent mistakes, and our planning enforcement system needs to be fair. But these rogue developers prey on that system. They use it to their advantage. They profit from fairness through abusing the system by appealing, delaying, changing, amending, adapting. What was a farm becomes a spray shop, becomes a junkyard, becomes a dwelling, becomes a block of flats. Redeveloping, appealing, delaying, building, ignoring, they can continue to profit from rogue development with impunity, making vast amounts of money. And the local authority? Helpless. Trapped in our cumbersome enforcement and appeal system, and this must stop. When I first started as MP, my constituents brought the horror of rogue development to my attention. I spoke to many people on how we can solve it, and I was often told, stay out of it. It's too difficult, Ben. It can't be solved. Such are the challenges in enforcement. On a particularly egregious case, one of my local councils, Runnymede, has had to use extraordinary methods to try and stop what was happening. A POCA, a perceived crime order, to stop this rogue development cycle. This is crazy. And I refuse to accept that this problem is too difficult to fix. This is about basic fairness, protecting our communities and stopping villains from profiting from crime. And I don't think there's a single member of this House who disagrees with me regarding the importance of fixing this.
Will you give way?
Of course I'll give way.
Mr Deputy Speaker, in my neck of the woods in East Berkshire, and indeed in neighbouring Hampshire and Surrey, I can think of plenty of examples where unscrupulous landowners have put scrap cars onto those sites. They've contaminated the soil. They've put small dwellings on. Constant encroachment of what's physically there already. Does my honourable friend agree, therefore, that we must give councils the powers to deal with this and to allow these unscrupulous people not to make money from their actions?
Well, I thank my honourable friend from Bracknell for his intervention, and of course I entirely agree with him. And it's just another example, as I said in to start my opening remarks, how this is something that certainly, while blights many parts of Runnymede and Weybridge, is not limited to Runnymede and Weybridge, and I think affects people across England and Wales. Fine.
Can I, my honourable friend, forgive me. Can I ask him why his bill is drafted in such a tentative way, saying that the Secretary of State may make regulations? Why isn't he, bearing in mind the strength of feeling which he has and which I share very much on this, why is he not demanding more of the Secretary of State in his bill?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and the reason for drafting as us is this whole area of planning enforcement and law is complicated. And I recognise that, and discussions that I've had with government ministers.
Mr. Spencer, could you... Sir Christopher, but you have to talk to the Chamber. Thank you.
Mr. Deputy Speaker. I recognise that this is a very complicated area, and any chink in the armour in terms of how enforcement and appeals process goes forwards is something that rogue developers will use to their advantage, as I will come to a bit later on in my speech. And so I think it's important that there is enough scope as possible for the regulations around the provisions which are being brought in to be adapted and be amended and be updated to ensure that we get this absolutely right in terms of preventing these rogue developments from happening. So that's why it's been drafted for us in terms of...
We give way.
Oh, of course.
Sorry, I'm not helping him make any progress, but he's mentioned the impact that it has on local authorities, but it is also the impact that it has on our residents and our constituents, who spend countless hours on neighbourhood plans, who spend countless hours trying to get the very best for their communities, only to find developers ignore them. It is about them, it is about the taxpayers' money and where it goes in terms of what our local authorities do. So I hope he recognises, as we do in this bill, that there is an enormous opportunity to restore the faith in process and ensure that greed is not winning the day.
Well, I thank my honourable friend from Totnes for his intervention and exactly that. I think one of the challenges is that people see, my residents see, what is effectively a two-tier system, in that people who don't play by the rules are managing to benefit from it. And that is a source of great frustration and infuriation. I think in terms of enhancing faith in the law, faith in local authorities, faith in government, dare I say, putting in measures to stop people being able to get away with breaking rules, I think, is critically important. So why is all this so hard? Well, let's go through it. Under our current processes, let's suppose someone builds a lorry park without permission on a farm. Well, first it needs to get reported. The local planning authority must investigate and, if necessary, issue an enforcement notice. All this time, the lorries are moving and the rogue developer is making money. Section 1741 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 then provides a right of appeal. And this is where it really starts to get fun. Written notice of the appeal must be sent to the Secretary of State before the date specified in the enforcement notice as the date on which it is to take effect. If an applicant gives notice of appeal without providing a statement in writing specifying the grounds of appeal, grounds on which he or she is appealing, they are then granted a further 14 days to provide this. OK, so far, council's found the breach. That takes time. Has investigated. That takes time. And if one games the system by submitting an appeal without a statement, one gets even more time. And all of this time, the lorries are moving and the rogue developer is making money. If an enforcement appeal is delayed because the appellant fails to provide sufficient information and the Department's request for it are ignored, the Department will invoke the Secretary of State's powers in Regulation 5 to require time limits to be observed. So, before we even get to the appeal, again, not providing information can lead to ongoing delays. More lorries, more money for the rogue developer. Most enforcement appeals are transferred to the planning inspectors for determination. Appeals represent the highest volume, but not all of their work, and the number of open cases is vast, increased to about 11,000 in August 2020, and while this number did begin to reduce in recent months, it's been rising again in the summer, reached 10,500. The average time for inquiries to be heard is 60 weeks. Let's think about that. 60 weeks. 60 weeks of lorries moving, developers, rogue developers making money. Now, once the Secretary of State or Planning Inspector has determined an appeal, an application for leave to submit a further appeal in the High Court can be made in the point of law under Section 289 of the 1990 Act. This must be submitted within 28 days of the appeal or an extended period at the court's discretion. So long and drawn out is this process. Government guidance even sets out consideration if it takes longer than 4 years. 4 years of lorries. But by this time, it's no longer just a lorry park. Homes are starting to be built. The next cycle is about to begin. All this time, the rogue developer making money. Changing the goalposts, gaming the system, destroying our communities. And my constituents, they say to me, Ben, look at this. We live in a society where the rule of law is broken. What can I say to them? Add to all this, planning enforcement to the discretionary service at a time that local authority finances have been under significant pressure. I must stress, this is not the fault of our local authorities and their planning enforcement teams, not at all. They are fantastic. They are equally frustrated by the lengthy delays in trying to tackle these issues. They too would welcome further powers so we can identify and address rogue development more swiftly and effectively. Tackling this in a nutshell is the aim of the Planning Enforcement Bill. First, the bill will create greater transparency, making it easier to identify persistent offenders. Currently, there is no way to identify or track those who persistently flout planning rules. And this bill will therefore create a national database for planning enforcement issues and a duty to declare whether an applicant has been subject to previous enforcement notices. This will be populated by planning enforcement teams and paid for through the existing mechanisms of the planning application fee. Now, to address the most serious planning breaches, those that cause the most significant damage or impact on our communities and natural environment, this bill also seeks to strengthen the powers available to local planning authority. Clause 3, therefore, sets out a mechanism for local authorities to apply for a High Court injunction where the court may apply conditions on the site of the developer, including but not restricted to restricting the use of a site currently subject to enforcement proceedings, so stopping the lorries, requiring remedial action to return the site to its prior condition, pulling back the forest, digging up the concrete and asphalt, and preventing further applications being made until the initial enforcement matter is resolved, to break the endless cycle of overlapping applications and appeals.
Does he have any knowledge, and perhaps if he doesn't, perhaps the Minister might when he winds up, of when this happens on a pure greenfield site? The damage that he's talking about would, if the planning application had gone ahead, would turn that into a brownfield site, of which then it would become somewhere we could build on afterwards. What happens to that site? Does it then, if it is put back to normal, does it become a greenfield site again, or will it always be seen as a brownfield site because the damage has been done?
So I thank my honourable friend for her intervention. So I can't answer that question. I look forward to I hope the Minister can in terms of his winding up, and I realise we've now set him a task to do. But what I will say is, in terms of examples in my constituency, is that where this has happened and where things like a POC has been put in place, essentially the damage has been done. And so I do recognise the duty to try and put back to us before perhaps is a bit of wishful thinking and desire in terms of better. I think is if we take out the commercial incentive here, then hopefully we can stop this all dead in its tracks. And these are the measures that which are meant in terms of bringing that forward. As everyone has said, all this is complicated. And in addition to bringing forward these measures, we will need to review them to make sure they work. And so my bill also seeks to review the effectiveness of them to see if more needs to be done. So finally, I'd like to finish up by thanking everyone who's worked with me to get where we are today. My local authorities, planning officers, the government and members across this House. Rogue development is a nightmare It wreaks havoc on all our communities. I believe it can be solved.
Will he give way?
Of course I give way.
Just before he does finish, I find it extraordinary that in this House we spend a great deal of time on these benches being attacked by the Liberal Democrats over planning and the lack of accountability given to developers. And on the day that he brings forward a bill that does that, that holds developers account, they are nowhere to be seen.
I thank my honourable friend for Totnes for pointing it out, and I hope many of our constituents, and certainly all our constituents, are watching and reading Hansard in terms of our debate and discussion, bringing forward these important issues. So I believe this can be solved. It must be solved for all our communities, and I hope that we will look back on this debate today as the start of the end of rogue development.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time.